Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge Company. I still can't stop smiling about the election and, of course, talking about it. And I can't think of anyone better to do that with than my guest, Vincent Montalbano, because he loves politics and he's passionate about its potential. So can you remember, hello, you shouldn't say that, I can't wait to talk. Can you remember any election that you felt had such potential to make a change in?
I think the last time I could remember an election like this was Jimmy Carter's election in '76. Yeah. Unfortunately, we were a little disappointed a few years later, but that had a similar type of potential. I mean,
you felt that way about it?
I did. Now, I was very young when Jack Kennedy was elected.
Right.
I was 11 years old, but that was also very exciting. But later on, I think during his administration, I became more interested in politics as I got to my teens.
I think the difference is, I mean, I was around when Jack Kennedy was elected, with Carter, and all that. Stevenson was lost twice, and Roosevelt had been president when I was a young kid. But the difference with this election is the worldwide implications. I mean, I think even with Carter, it wasn't so much worldwide, was it?
No, the difference.
And of course, it wasn't.
The implications are legion here. I mean, they really are. And just briefly on Carter. I mean, I think we had just gone through Watergate. We had gone through the Nixon era, and he particularly in bringing the country together around the end of the Vietnam War and the amnesty and things like that. I thought were very hopeful.
Yeah.
But it's a different time now. I mean, we really are experiencing a time that is unprecedented in many of our lifetimes, no matter how old we are or how young we are. And obviously, there are obvious changes that have occurred as a result of this election. But I'm euphoric about it.
Okay,
I don't like to use words that are that strong, but it's euphoric. I'm really happy. I'm relieved. I'm excited. But for many reasons, it's the obvious ones. I mean, we've elected an African American. We've gone past that point finally after so many years, and that's very important. But there were so many other things that the American people did, and so many other things that Obama allowed them to do that I think are equally important. I mean, I think there was a resurgence in old-fashioned populism, which Americans exhibit at times, usually at times of great economic distress, only to abandon it later on. Right. But we'll take it when we can get it. I mean, I think there was a renewal of political dialogue. You and I have had this discussion before, where the McCain campaign, the Republican campaign, was the same in terms of the language they used and the things they put forward. But his campaign really just brought dialogue up to a new point.
But what do you mean by populism?
Well, for me, populism is really an economic construct. I mean, I do think that finally the American people in this election were not deceived, at least for now. I'm not going to go any further than where we are now, but at least for now they were not deceived by this idea that all boats rise as a result of the ones at the top being able to float so high. Right. And that's important, because we're not going to achieve all kinds of other equity issues until we deal with the fact that economic inequality in this country is enormous.
Does it bother you at all that all we talk about is the middle class? Because we don't hear anything about the poor.
Yeah, I usually speak from two places. So as a practical political technician, the answer to that is no. I mean, I think that just as with anything else, you have to bring people along. And in talking about the middle class, and the middle class, or working people who are considered middle class, are suffering so badly, it wasn't such a bad thing to talk about. But in doing that, I think Obama was able to bring people to the point where they are. But I think that while he didn't maybe specifically target the poor in his dialogue, I think that people understand from the position that they're in now economically that what the poor are feeling, how easy it is to become poor in this kind of a situation. And I think that the goodwill that he's going to carry with him is going to enable him to do the kinds of things we're talking about.
What do we consider the middle class? I mean, at first I thought, well, the middle class is someone who has a job, right? And a family, and they're managed. But a lot of the middle class now doesn't have a job, don't have jobs. So they're poor.
Yeah.
So what are we considering poor? Maybe we've eliminated poor.
Well, I hope we haven't. I don't think
we haven't eliminated poverty.
Yeah, we haven't eliminated poverty.
But the term, I mean, when you think about it.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of, if you remember, in this election, there was a lot of discussion about exactly what middle class was. 5,200,000, whatever it was. I think for most people, middle class means people who have jobs and careers that are steady, that pay them a good income, where their family is able to make the money necessary to perhaps purchase a house and do things like that. Poor could also be people who work. A lot of working poor are poor, but it probably is something that's defined a little differently in terms of income.
Well, but he's defining it basically to 200,000. An income of 200,000, isn't he, in a way?
Well, he's defining that in terms of what he's going to do
with taxes.
In terms of taxes.
Right.
I mean,
I think that's a more appropriate kind of definition of middle class.
Well, I do.
But along with that, I think the line for poverty should be raised.
Yeah. Here's what my concern is. I think that trying to define where the lines are in class is probably not the correct issue. I think basically there's the 1% who are super wealthy, and then there's basically everybody else. So if if people are making 200,000, or they're making 20,000, or they're making 500,000, there are some differences there, but it doesn't compare at all. It pales by comparison to the 1% of the population that is making this enormous amount of money and still has an enormous amount of money, notwithstanding the downturn.
Right.
So I think what I'm saying here is I think Obama's changed the dialogue so that we can look at people of wealth, not so much as being the enemy, but as being people who need to participate a little more in the civic fabric the way the rest of us do.
Right,
and that means paying a little more taxes on their income and being a little more responsible in that way.
You're a union person. I mean, you've worked for unions and you represent unions now as my grade AAA lobbyist.
Thank you.
Because you only lobby for good issues and causes. What is the lowest salary of a union member? What's the range?
Well, I think it depends, and there are certainly people being organized in the private sector who, make maybe $15 an hour, $12, $15 an hour, and who really need to be organized as a result of that. In the public sector, in New York City, New York City, even if you're not working part-time, you could be starting at a salary of low 20s.
So is that considered middle class?
Again, Ronnie, I think
coming back to this.
I think it depends on how you feel about it. I think people when they talk about class, nobody wants to be considered poor. Nobody wants to be poor. Yeah. So the middle class is such an elastic concept because everybody kind of wants to be in it. But that's not as important. It's not that end and the bottom end or the back end. It's that end and the top end that I think we've discussed and we've been allowed to discuss. And that's what's so important to me. And the other thing that happened here, and we left off the last time we were together on Super Tuesday. The results hadn't come in yet, and of course we know that from that point to the end of the primaries, it was a pretty hairy time. But we left off by talking about the fact that, unfortunately, Senator Clinton introduced into the dialogue this idea of elitism, that producing big ideas and making grand speeches was somehow some kind of a elitist thing. And I think that we've also, at least for now, for this election, overcome the anti-intellectual roots of a lot of American politics. This is a guy who is an intellect. This is a guy. He's a professor. He's a constitutional scholar. He doesn't shy away from speaking in big words and using big concepts. And I think that it was great that the population, the voters, were not put off by that. We're not afraid of that, accepted that, and said, you know what? We are in such a bad place that we want a leader that is like that, and that's a tremendous. But
some of the voters didn't, right? I mean, in a funny way, the South, which is changing as we've discovered from the results. But it's interesting to note that the people in the South who are less educated, right,
and
who they were the ones who voted for whatever his name is, McCain.
How quickly you forget, or like to forget.
Isn't that what the demographic showed?
It is what the demographic
The people with
showed.
higher educations, higher incomes, higher everything were a large proportion of Obama's vote.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a couple of things I would say about that. First of all, I think that's the group of people that Obama clumsily referred to in that little monologue at the fundraiser in San Francisco when he talked about clinging to guns and religion. And he tried to explain that many times. And I think he said very clearly what he meant is what he meant. He didn't mean that as a put down on them, but that basically, you know, things are so bad and nobody's paying attention to them that they go to the things that they're most comfortable with. So there's there's always going to be a segment of the population that is going to feel that way. I also think that the Palin pick, the McCain-Palin pick, was something that appealed to a segment of the population. And interestingly, that gets back to some of the discussion we had during the primary. You know, when there was this oldest discussion about the red part of Pennsylvania and how he couldn't win that, and that meant he wasn't going to win Pennsylvania. I kept saying to people, but one thing does not necessarily follow the other. Yes, there are a lot of people in that part of Pennsylvania that might not vote for him, that might see, in that case, it was Clinton, as somebody they wanted to vote for. But remember that Kerry won Pennsylvania in the general election. Right. So, one doesn't overlay the other. You just have to kind of accept the demographics and try and work with them, which is one of the outstanding aspects of this campaign, is that the technicians in this campaign and Obama as the leader, they were unbelievable. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I'm very quick to criticize because I'm a professional. I like to think that I'm as smarter than anybody else in this realm. But I just sat back in awe of how they did this. And thank God that they did.
Yeah, it was very interesting because they never rethought anything, I don't think. They had it planned, don't you? I mean, they weren't a campaign that was shifting back and forth. In the field, there were two operations. One was a very carefully controlled operation, and the other was open season. Do whatever you want to do. It was so fascinating to me.
It was fascinating. I think that they really did take advantage of the internet generation and the looseness of that, and allowing them to kind of self-organize. But at the same time, as you said, staying on message, having a very strong strategic message that they wanted to stay with, and they did stay with that. And he was a great candidate in that regard. During the campaign, I watched him, and he'd be on the debates or in interviews, he'd be asked questions, and I'd say to myself, "Oh my goodness, how is he going to answer this? How would I have advised him to answer this?" And then he would just do it, and I'd say,
I always feel, let's talk for a few minutes about him. I feel as if he was dropped here from another planet. He's this golden boy. The world is looking at this guy to really bring fundamental change. I mean, everybody in the world, it's so fascinating. And he's made people also, I think, many people decide in their mind they're going to let him do what he thinks he has to do.
Yeah.
I think everybody's sort of saying, let's give him a chance, and we're going to support him.
Yeah. Well, it's scary and exhilierating both, and it's a little frightening because especially as adults, as you become older, you realize you fall in love with people and they disappoint you, whether it's personally or business-wise or in politics particularly. We can name many of the people we were in love with in politics. So that's a little frightening. But at the same time, I do agree with you that this is extraordinary, and it's because there are moments in history, and we can trace the moments in American history, where the times have called forth the leader. Obviously, George Washington, our first president, Lincoln, and the Civil War and slavery, and Roosevelt, which this is probably closest to during the Depression and the economic times. The interesting thing, by the way, is that each of those periods of time were almost an equal amount of years apart.
Every 30 years,
No, it was 72 years, actually, between each of those three.
It was Arthur Schlesinger who said every 32 years or 30 years.
Well, I think you may get some stronger leaders in that period, but if you talk about those three as being the ones who presided over the greatest change, it's that kind of period. And this is almost within a period. It's like 70.
It is, right. It's
76 this time.
I think his campaign, the way it was conducted, is totally due to him. I think he's a very solid disciplined,
I agree.
reasoned, calm person. And I don't think anybody ever told him what to do. I mean, I think he's collaborative. I think he works with people. I think they sat down, that little group, Axelrod and Poof. How do you pronounce his name?
Poof.
Poof. And they decided what they were going to do.
Yeah,
and
I
that's
agree.
what they did. And he knew he was taking a big leap into the unknown. But he's also, I don't know. I am just totally overwhelmed with a good feeling. And I think everybody I talk to, you walk on the street, and we're still wearing our Obama buttons,
Right.
you know. I was in a lamp store the other day, and some woman came over, and she said, "Didn't I see you in Florida?" I said, "No." But she said, "I spent 2 months in Delray Beach. I was visiting my 92-year-old mother and working for Obama," you know. But everybody's got a story or something. It's just an incredible time.
I agree.
And it's as if he is just made for that time.
I think that's true, but and I think that is the way history moves forward. And he definitely is a person for this time. This definitely is a time where we need change. You know, we've been talking about the economy since March, but more intensively since September, and that is critically important. But we've hopefully not forgotten. I know he hasn't forgotten, but in the back of our dialogue, we are not talking so much about energy. We're not talking so much about healthcare. All of these things are coming. All these things are coming together. What I really love about him is his ability to connect all these things. So he says, in terms of the economy,
the automobile industry,
right? But even with that, he has said a couple of days ago, I want to help them get bailed out, but they're going to have to agree to build better, more energy efficient cars. Right. And he's talked where Roosevelt had the WPA and all of the physical building that went along with that. He's saying we're going to do building too, but we're going to reinvent our infrastructure to be green. There is so much that we need to do in that regard. So that's why I have such a great feeling about the future, and I'm hopeful that he can overcome some of the pettiness that necessarily is going to occur.
When they said
in
he wasn't
politics.
strong, you know, answer back. Why aren't you fighting back and everything else?
Right.
I mean, how could anybody say he isn't strong? He's an African American running for president of the United States. What kind of strength does that take?
Right.
You know, so let's talk about the other side. In between, let's talk about China with their WPA projects going on. I think that's fabulous. And maybe it's going to be contagious around the world, don't you think? This economic distress is going to bring out of it some good, very hopeful good changes?
I'm hopeful. I think certainly if anything can, economic distress can, but economic distress can also cause other kinds of distress, and that's one of the reasons why you want to have great leaders in the world. There are some good ones, and now we have a very good one as well, and we can rejoin the leadership of the world in trying to solve some of these problems.
So what's going to happen with the Republican Party?
Well, you know, I don't care so much about the Republican Party, but I guess if I was advising them, I would say that they should need to really take stock of what their message is, what their ideology is. I don't think, at least for now, that it can any longer be just this complete negativism, this trying to set groups against groups, telling people, you know, how bad things are, but how, so what? You have to kind of accept that because that's the way it is. Well, again, at the top of the spectrum, nobody is asking anybody to engage themselves in terms of making the society better. So I think the Republican Party is going to have to take stock of that. I'm hoping that means that they will become more moderate. There's always
been this great mixture between the Republican Party and the religious right.
Yes.
And
yes.
But it's interesting in California, for instance, you have Schwarzenegger who was against the amendment, or was it an amendment, or was it a?
There was a referendum
a referendum wasn't an amendment to the Constitution
to prohibit gay marriages. Yeah.
He was very strongly against it, but the religious right was able to organize to pass it. I mean, that is that's an important.
I think I'm hoping, and we certainly went through an election where we were concerned as progressives that these so-called cultural issues, these wedge issues, were going to intervene again. They didn't, and maybe it's because of another intervention. Maybe there was divine intervention in allowing the economy to come
like
to
Sarah
the fore.
Palin
Well,
or something.
I don't want to sound like that, but certainly the economy did overtake that, and that was important because none of us want to see a crisis, but the economic issues are the ones we want to focus on. But there still are these other kinds of issues around. I'm hopeful that the election of Barack Obama and his leadership as president will begin also to moderate those kinds of issues. You know, in California, that referendum failed, and it failed because a lot of people who voted for Barack Obama also voted against or for that referendum.
What do you mean it failed? It didn't fail.
Or passed, rather.
Passed.
And because a lot of people who voted for Barack Obama voted for that referendum as well.
Incredible.
So, you know, that's an interesting little social dynamic that we're going to have to take into account.
I think there's so much fear instilled in people. And the Republican Party, I think, displayed such cynicism in this campaign with the charges that they made against Obama and also with the selection of Palin. I mean, that was really over the top.
It was sad.
That I think, and I do believe that the public is tired of the cynical approach to politics.
I think they showed that in electing him.
Yeah.
They showed that in coming out to vote in the numbers that they came out with.
Right.
But it's also going to depend. Look, I think you're right in what you said before, that people are going to give him a chance, a long chance to do the things that he says he wants to do. And while I'm happy that he did accentuate these economic issues, because I believe all equity and equality is in the end based in economics, clearly he is a good progressive person, and these other kinds of issues, civil rights issues of all kinds.
But pragmatic above all.
He is. But you know, in expanding the dialogue, in making the dialogue less divisive, more inclusive, while you may not get everyone to come to the same beliefs or agree on things, if we can turn down the heat, so we can have a dialogue that is informative and valuable, then these types of issues, I think, over the course of time get resolved. It's going to be also more than a dialogue,
because, you know, that phrase of Kennedy's, "Ask not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you," that's the basic part of his campaigning and of him, is the participation of people down. And I think that people are ready for that. I think that they want to feel, I don't know, where did I read this? It was someplace. So I guess it was a story in the Times Magazine section about by a writer who said his grandfather used to tell him stories about the Great Depression and how you didn't have any material things the way you can show, but it brought families and friends closer together. And they used to sit around the stove in the store or something and talk about personal things or much more real things.
Right.
I think that's what's going to happen here. I think people are going to want to care about more people and try to do something about it.
Right,
and
he's also setting an example. I mean, isn't that family just a wonderful sight to see? I mean, you can see the affection among them all, between he and his wife, between he and his children, him and his wife.
Between is a preposition for all those English students out there.
Okay, we're a CUNY, that's all right. But you can see that. I mean, the affection is real. He also spoke about, as you just kind of alluded to, he spoke about responsibility, not just civic responsibility, but family responsibility, personal responsibility. You know, there are things. This election was so intense that there are phrases that just kind of went by the boards without you even realizing it. But I took note of how many times on TV, in the media, people talked about the fact that this was an intact African American nuclear family, and that could have been so charged in a different environment, but I think that he embodies what we all want to see in our leaders is that kind of responsibility.
We haven't talked enough about race in this thing. I mean, it seems to me, was a wonderful bridge as far as people with feelings of uncertainty about their feelings about race. But if we're really going to be successful, we're going to have to, education is going to have to be the basic thing. I mean, this is a guy who stood up and talked and personified, as you said, a family. So we do have to worry about the poor and people who don't have stable families and who don't have jobs and who don't have decent education, because this isn't going to mean that their children can be president unless they can share in all the abundance that the country should have to offer.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost, you don't think there's enough time to even describe. I think over the course of time, we will find more and more lessons in this, good positive lessons in this, which is what makes it so fascinating and so wonderful and so exhilarating. And as I keep saying, so frightening in some ways, because it's you don't want to believe it's too good to be true, and yet you want to believe that
it's
it is true.
Movie. Last week I said I wish I was his mother-in-law, and now I read that his mother-in-law is moving into the White House, which I think is so fabulous.
It is.
Where did they not live in public housing in Chicago when Michelle was growing up? Father.
I think I heard that, but
I think
I
so,
can't
but
say
I'm not sure.
Right.
But can you imagine someone of her generation? She's going to live in the White House with her son-in-law, the president. It knocks all the jokes about my son-in-law, the doctor, out of
That's true. That's
out
true.
of the thing. And it is such a wonderful picture. It really is.
It is a wonderful picture, and it's a good one for the entire society to behold. There's a lot of great feelings out there. You know, it does. I know Michelle got in trouble for saying something along the lines of what I'm about to say.
Right, exactly.
But it really does make me proud of my
country
and my society, and I think everybody really basically feels that way.
I do. I think so. We haven't even discussed any of the city matters, which I wanted to discuss with you, and we've come to the end of this program.
Okay.
So we're going to have to do that at some time, and I appreciate your being here, and let's all be thrilled and happy and think that the world is really going to progress in the way we hope it will.
Hear, hear.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.